My name is Eleanor, and for 40 years I believed I had raised a good son. I was wrong. The day the betrayal started, it began with a laugh, a cruel, brittle sound that echoed across the dinner table. "Honestly, Mom," my son, Mark, said, pushing his plate away, "that car is an embarrassment. It's a death trap. A $500 Focus? Just get rid of the junk already." His wife, Sarah, chimed in with that sickening sweet tone she reserved for maximum cruelty. "It's a danger, Eleanor. A liability. Sell it and buy us a nice bottle of wine at least. You're practically polluting the neighborhood with that museum piece." I sat at their polished mahogany table, clutching my purse, and smiled. They saw a quiet, meek, old woman. They saw a grieving widow relying on her children. They saw a car worth less than their monthly food bill. They didn't know the keys to that $500 Ford Focus were the keys to their entire, devastating downfall. They mocked my $500 car. They didn't know it was the most sophisticated surveillance tool they would ever sit in. They didn't know the car they wanted gone was the very thing that would expose their secret, unthinkable murder plot. The '98 Ford Focus wasn't just old, it was a memory. My late husband, Robert, the kindest, smartest man I ever knew, bought it 25 years ago. Robert was an engineer, not a spy, but he hated waste. Years ago, Robert ran a charity, delivering medical supplies to remote areas. To ensure accountability, Robert didn't trust commercial trackers. He built his own system. He installed a military-grade GPS unit under the back seat. It was wired into the ignition, the fuel pump, and, most importantly, a hidden, highly sensitive microphone integrated into the dashboard wiring. He linked it all to a secure, private server. He called it the Sentinel. Only Robert and I knew the specific, complicated sequence, a series of ignition key turns and brake pedal presses that activated the surveillance mode. After he passed, I kept the system running, not out of paranoia, but out of habit. It was the last piece of Robert I had. It wasn't surveillance. It was nostalgia. And that nostalgia, my dear son and daughter-in-law, was about to become the hammer of justice. The shift came subtly. My grandson, David, Mark's son from a previous marriage, the sweetest boy, was finishing university. He was completely innocent. Mark started pressuring David to take a long cross-country trip to check on an investment property. "Take the Focus, David," Mark urged with an unsettling enthusiasm. "It's cheap on gas, and if it breaks, who cares? It's just $500. You can save wear and tear on your own car." David, ever the dutiful son, agreed. I watched Mark and Sarah exchange that chilling glance, a quick, cold flicker of shared intent. I knew then. The car was not the target. David was. I went to the garage and performed the old activation sequence. Key turn, brake, key turn, brake. The tiny green light on the console, hidden under a frayed upholstery seam, blinked once. The Sentinel was online. I then hugged David goodbye, slipping a seemingly innocent good luck charm, a polished river stone, into his backpack. It was Robert's secondary bug, a clean, untraceable audio recorder. The moment David pulled onto the highway, I was on my laptop. I watched the GPS tracker light up, a steady green line tracing David's journey. Everything was normal for the first 6 hours. Then the line deviated. Sharp left turn, off the highway, into the middle of nowhere. David's car stopped at a location marked only as unregistered industrial zone. It sat there for 4 hours, no movement, just silence from the audio feed. My hands were shaking. I forced myself to focus. I scrubbed through the audio from the car's built-in mic. Static. Then voices. Mark's voice, cold and clinical. "The job is done. Get rid of the car tomorrow. The insurance is clear now." Sarah responded, a whisper of cruel relief. And the boy, no loose ends, Mark. We need that payout. The transmission cut out. Silence. My world narrowed to that single devastating fragment of audio. The car they mocked, the son I loved. Attempted murder was my son's idea of retirement plan. I spent the next morning in the police station. Grief was a luxury I couldn't afford. Detective Hayes was a man carved from concrete, skeptical, procedural, and exhausted. I poured out the story, the GPS data, the 4-hour stop, the fragment of audio. Hayes was polite but dismissive. Mrs. Eleanor, this evidence is inadmissible. A homemade system in a 25-year-old car. It's not certified, it's just speculation. Your son and daughter-in-law are grieving parents. This audio fragment could be about anything. He explained the legal reality. Without a body or certified evidence, they couldn't even issue an Amber Alert, let alone arrest Mark and Sarah. David was legally an adult who voluntarily left. They filed the case as voluntary missing person. My heart turned to ice. The law was blind to a mother's instinct. I was utterly alone. The motive had to be money. I used the money Robert left me to hire a private investigator to look into Mark's finances. It was a waste of time. They found nothing. I decided to trust my own instincts and Robert's tools. I hacked into David's email, a password only I knew. There it was, a massive, recently purchased life insurance policy, payable upon accidental death away from the primary residence. Mark and Sarah were the sole beneficiaries. I spent hours compiling the slow financial trail. Mark's overwhelming business debt, Sarah's casino marker. The policy payout wasn't just a bonus, it was their salvation. They needed David dead to save their own comfortable lives. The Ford Focus wasn't a cheap car. It was a conveniently disposable murder weapon, far from home. Mark and Sarah were performing for the neighborhood. They started a GoFundMe to help find David. I played along, attending every staged vigil. I had to maintain my cover as the poor, grieving old woman. The most agonizing hours were spent watching the live surveillance on my laptop, the screen tracking David's empty car. I had the car's internal microphone open, listening to the silence, praying David wasn't in it anymore. I slowly logged Mark and Sarah's mundane, utterly heartless conversations about funeral arrangements and how they would spend the insurance money, all while pretending to mourn. This detailed, cold dissection of their hypocrisy became the bulk of my investigation. I returned to the original audio fragment from the first night, the clank. It was a short, sharp, metallic sound repeated 3 times. I filtered it again, isolating the pitch and frequency. It was distinct. I cross-referenced the GPS stop location with old industrial records. The unregistered industrial zone was actually a defunct Red Hook terminal, a massive train yard and shipping depot abandoned decades ago. The metallic sound was a specific type of loading bell. I zoomed in on the satellite image. Near the center of the depot, I spotted a tiny anomaly, a cluster of unusual rectangular objects, shipping containers. Mark and Sarah hadn't killed David, they'd hidden him. The car was just bait. The motive wasn't just money, it was long-term incarceration followed by a staged death. The clue was tiny, but Robert's old system never lied. I realized then, I needed to stop working alone. I was going back to Detective Hayes, and this time I had a real piece of the puzzle and a plan to force his hand.
I knew I had to go back to Detective Hayes, but this time I wouldn't beg. I presented him with my filtered audio, the train yard location, and David's life insurance policy. I didn't ask him to arrest them. I asked him to help me collect admissible evidence. Hayes was a good cop, but cautious. He agreed to an unofficial consultation. He confirmed the metallic clank was consistent with the old gantry cranes at the Red Hook terminal. He also confirmed that Mark had recently visited the train yard's owner under the pretense of a real estate evaluation. The pieces fit. Hayes's problem was the law. My system was illegal surveillance. His solution? We need to force them to admit the crime in a space we legally control. Or, better yet, we need to make them think their original plan is falling apart. And so it was that I found myself planning to trap my own son using my husband's obsession. Mark and Sarah, under pressure from the insurance company, needed a body. They attempted a cynical frame job, staging David's death as an accidental drowning far away. They drove to a remote section of the river, leaving pieces of David's clothing and his wallet near the bank. I watched the GPS feed on my laptop, horrified. They spent hours meticulously planting false evidence. I felt sick watching my own son, the boy I raised, perform such calculated cruelty. Hayes, meanwhile, had a small, private team investigate the drowning site. They recovered the wallet, but found no body. This was key. The failed frame job gave Hayes the legal predicate to investigate Mark and Sarah for obstruction and tampering, which was enough to get a search warrant. It was time for the snare. Following Hayes's instruction, I did the unthinkable. I called Mark. I pretended to be distraught and whispered a manufactured rumor. The police found the focus. They're recovering the vehicle and tracking its electronics. They know where it was parked last night. The panic in Mark's voice was immediate and visceral. He snapped at me. "You shouldn't have called them, Mom." He hung up abruptly. On my GPS screen, I watched the immediate, erratic movements of Mark and Sarah's new car. They didn't drive to the police station. They drove straight to the train yard. They believed the Sentinel was still in the Ford, and they had to destroy the physical evidence before the police seized it. They were walking straight into Hayes's legal trap. Hayes had the train yard sealed off. I was in a police van a quarter-mile away, using my laptop to give Hayes real-time updates. The silence was deafening, broken only by Hayes's whispered commands to his officers. Mark and Sarah, clad in dark clothes, slipped into the abandoned depot. The car's microphone, still live, sitting in the ignition, caught their frantic whispers. "Mark, find the focus. We have to pull the GPS unit. I knew that cursed junk car would ruin us." "Sarah, forget the car. Just find the box. It's too cold in there. We need to move him soon." Then, over the feed, loud and clear, came the sound I'd filtered hours for. The distinct, repetitive, metallic clank of the gantry cranes. Sarah hit a control box by accident. The audio evidence was now tied directly to the physical location. Hayes's team moved in. They apprehended Mark and Sarah as they searched frantically for the car. The crime was no longer hypothetical. It was a clear conspiracy to obstruct justice, giving Hayes a solid arrest. The real discovery came when the police searched the storage containers. Behind a stack of rusted barrels, they found a small, temperature-controlled shipping container, a makeshift freezer. Hayes's voice crackled over the radio. "We found the victim. He's alive, heavily sedated, but alive." My relief was a physical force. David, my innocent grandson, was rescued. Mark and Sarah hadn't killed him yet. They were prolonging his disappearance to buy time for the insurance payout, keeping him sedated so he couldn't escape. The cost of their greed was nearly 9 hours of David's young life in a human deep freeze.
Mark and Sarah were brought back to the precinct. Hayes wanted the full confession. He played them the microphone audio from the $500 Focus. They scoffed, invoking their right to silence, saying the audio was illegal and edited. Hayes then introduced me to the interrogation room. My son looked at me with cold fury. "You ruined us, Mom. You're a sick old spy." I didn't flinch. I reached into my purse and placed the polished river stone on the table. "This is a lucky charm, Mark. David's lucky charm. It was in his backpack in that freezer, and it recorded every word you just said in this room, confirming your attempted murder plot and your full confession after I left." The look on Sarah's face, the absolute, total horror of realizing their real confession had just been legally recorded by the secondary bug, was the greatest sight I have ever seen. The two-layer surveillance was Robert's ultimate failsafe. The final, clean audio was the evidence Hayes needed. The trial was a circus. Mark and Sarah's legal team tried every trick in the book. They argued that David's long disappearance justified their panic.
They attempted to dismiss every piece of digital evidence I had collected, calling me a vengeful, aging spy driven by grief. The defense lawyer hammered Detective Hayes, claiming he had illegally colluded with me and that the entire case was based on the shaky GPS of a junkyard car. My lawyer, hired with the last of my husband's emergency funds, stood firm. The focus was the financial motive and the two clear-cut confessions. He presented the insurance policy, the motive for David's death, and painted the grim picture of Mark's debt. He reserved the best evidence for last, the audio. The 10-hour duration of my investigation was about to pay off in 2 short, devastating minutes of playback. I took the stand, not as a victim, but as a witness. I spoke clearly, detailing the hours I spent watching the little green dot on my screen, the sound of the metallic clank, and the crushing realization that my son wanted his own child dead for money. The prosecution then played the audio from David's Lucky Charm. The courtroom fell silent as Mark and Sarah's voices, stripped of pretense, filled the room. It was their full, cold confession, legally obtained, detailing the insurance plot and their plan to let David freeze to death. When I stepped down, Mark finally looked at me, not with fury, but with a vacant despair. I had loved him for 40 years, but the man on trial was a stranger, consumed by a greed I never knew existed. I had won, but the cost was the final death of my son. The jury took only 3 hours to return the verdict, guilty on all counts. The judge was stern. He lectured Mark and Sarah on the ultimate betrayal, not just of a mother, but of their own child. He looked at me, Eleanor, and praised my courage, saying the only reason David was alive was due to my unwavering maternal instinct and intelligence. The sentence was harsh, life in prison without parole. As they were led away, David walked over to me. He had the $500 check from the car's final insurance payout. He signed it and handed it to me. "It saved my life, Grandma. It's yours." I looked at the check, the exact amount of money my son mocked, and saw not the price, but the pure justice it represented. I immediately signed it over to the newly formed Robert Foundation for Victims of Elder Abuse. The story became local legend. The little $500 car became a symbol. I donated the Ford Focus to the police museum. They mounted it on a pedestal, labeling it the Silent Witness. David helped me start the foundation, dedicated to helping families gather evidence against financial abusers. We named it after Robert, who always believed in the power of invisible solutions. I found a quiet peace. My days were spent with David, rebuilding a bond shattered by greed. I realized my husband, Robert, didn't just love me. He anticipated the world's cruelty and gave me the tools to fight it. The Ford Focus wasn't a junk car. It was a Trojan horse of love and foresight. My name is Eleanor. I'm 75 now, and I live a quiet life, but I am strong. I learned that the greatest weapons in the world are the things your enemies never bothered to look for. They were so focused on the mansion and the money that they missed the cheap, rusting key in the ignition. They saw a meek old lady. They should have seen a mother who would stop at nothing. Greed ruined my son, but justice saved my grandson. And you? What is the most powerful, secret piece of equipment you have hidden in plain sight? What is the one thing your enemies would never think to look for?
Let me know your story in the comments below. I read every single one.